Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. Today we're going to be talking about starting your session 0 in regard to evil parties. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
All right, everybody, welcome back. John and I are talking about evil parties and your session 0. This is something he and I both had quite a bit of experience in, as we have both played as evil characters and we have ran campaigns with evil parties. John, let's start off by talking about the conversation that has to be had. How do you talk about the theological exploration or expectation of what evil is in gameplay with your party?
Right, yeah. The first thing that you really should have a conversation about with a party that wants to play evil characters is what evil is, and almost more importantly, what evil is not. To begin with, the easiest way to identify what evil is going to look like is usually selfishness. Good is identified as being selfless. You're doing things for other people, altruism, without necessarily expecting recompense for it. Traditionally in games, that's what paladins would do. Is if and even in some CRPGs like Icewind Dale 2, if you play a paladin and you're offered a reward, then you immediately refuse it because it's an altruistic outlook on what good is. For evil characters, though, it's about selfishness. It's about getting something specific that you want. The world revolves around you in some way. Your needs are more important than the needs of others. But, like I said, it's also important to identify what evil is not. And I think the most important thing is evil is not stupid. And I think that that's often a misconception of, especially newer players or players that are not as familiar with playing this type of character, is that if you're playing evil, then that means that you can do whatever you want and you don't have to worry about the consequences. And establishing very early on to the players that the actions of their characters do have consequences is important. Yeah, I mean, most people are familiar with games like Grand Theft Auto. If you go around shooting people or running over people on the street, the cops get called, they try to hunt you down, and eventually they will get you. Like, it's kind of a foregone conclusion, and that needs to be something that the players are aware of, that murder hoboism will be met with lethal force at some point in the future. They may try to run for a while or do whatever, but especially at low levels, it's a very dangerous trajectory to take as a character.
Yeah, I think that it's important for us to realize when we're going into a game and we have a party full of evil individuals is that it's multi-layered. There's multiple shades of what evil is. We definitely see this with characters who are playing good aligned folk. I mean, typically when you think of a tabletop game, you think of people coming in with their holy swords, they're going through and they're cutting down the bad guys throughout the world and bringing peace and justice back to the lands. And evil parties have their own motivations that are kind of pushing them throughout the story, but it may be different for every single character. And I agree with you. There is a level of selfishness that is kind of embedded or innate in each one of those characters and what is it they're doing. So the challenge that you have in running a game like this is getting all of those characters who have this inherent selfishness within them to then work together towards a common goal or objective or quest or adventure that you're setting out for them. So with them having multiple shades of evil within them, how do you accomplish that? What is the rationale or reasoning you have to provide for them to say, okay, you guys are all evil, you're all selfish, but you do have to work together or we don't have a game to play?
Right. Well, you can have that meta conversation. Honestly, like, that is not a bad conversation to have with the group and say, listen, if you want to play evil, just be aware that you need to construct a character that can play well with others. Because ultimately, if you're intending to build a character that is interested in murdering the rest of your party, it's not going to be a game that ends well. It's not going to be enjoyable for people. Having that meta conversation is fine. The second aspect of that, and this is probably more useful for the players going, well, then how do I do that? Is creating motivations for your characters. Simple motivations are fine. You can have a character that says, oh, I'm greedy, I just want more money. And there's that selfishness. But it's also kind of boring, for one. And for two, it doesn't really explain why they're greedy. Because the backstory for why somebody is obsessed with accruing wealth or accruing things should be more nuanced. Are they trying to get money in order to try and support a lifestyle? Do they see others who have that lifestyle and are envious of them and they think they deserve it? Are they trying to use that gold for some other means, and that could be actually construed as good in some way? You know, I grew up as an orphan and they don't deserve that, and I'm stealing from the wealthy, and I don't care what happens to any of those people so long as I'm supporting the people who matter most, because they self-identify as part of those lower class citizens. There are a number of ways for that to occur, but the motivations of a character should speak to their history and speak to the goals that they have as a character in the campaign. Beyond that, criminals in general, I mean, you can watch the shows about like the world's dumbest criminal. They do some stupid stuff. A lot of criminals are actually quite cunning and quite intelligent in the way they approach stuff. They work in groups, they work in teams because they find value in having like-minded individuals. And the party can still work in that way. If they recognize that the rest of the people in their group are of a similar motivation, similar goals, they're not going to turn me in for doing something bad, then they're not likely to betray that trust unless it's absolutely necessary, because it doesn't benefit them to burn bridges and to betray allies. Not only does it make it to where they're in a weaker stance, but it also makes it more difficult to find allies in the future.
Yeah, and that backstory piece I think is super important. I know you touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but when we've played games before in the past, recognizing how backstories might work with other backstories that other characters are making. I'm trying to think of the word that I want off the top of my head, but how they might intertwine with one another.
There you go.
Is there familial relationships that are connected? Have we been business partners for a long period of time? What is the connection there between our backstories that kind of already established that even before you go into your first session of gameplay, of already having a history there with your characters, so you're not stumbling along trying to find reason to see other people within your party as being beneficial to you, or to, boost up that selfishness that you have. Do you already have that established prior?
Right.
I know you've given good examples of this in the past of where this has been done in other storytelling. Like in my mind, I'm thinking of the Thor and Loki, which people usually see within the Marvel movies. There's definitely that connection of Thor deals with Loki because of their familial connection. Mm-hmm. But you have other great examples of how this has worked in other stories that we could draw off of as inspiration in creating an evil character that also has real connection.
Right. So, I mean, obviously, the probably the most public example would be something like Game of Thrones between Jaime and Cersei, right? They're both evil. They both have a familial connection. They would die for one another because not only are they twins, but they kind of like see each other in each other to a certain degree, so it feeds that selfish narcissism. Now, I mean, you can read into that more deeply if you're familiar with that and kind of talk about it a little bit more, but there are plenty of evil characters in the Game of Thrones that work well to one degree or another with others for their own selfish means because they make use of it. And the evil is not necessarily an impediment to their ability to accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish. I think maybe the reference that you're looking for me to make is from Dragonlance, but this is another familial connection between Caramon and Raistlin Mahir, who are twin brothers again. The twins is a very common trope among evil characters who work well together, but Caramon is like Thor and he's a good character. Raistlin's like Loki and he's an evil character. But there is that necessary connection that exists between them. And Raistlin is able to join parties of good individuals because Caramon is so well liked and he's so charming and charismatic to others that people are willing to overlook how evil and how terrible Raistlin is because they enjoy Caramon's company so much, which is also a very fascinating concept.
And it doesn't have to be familial, though. You're right. A lot of these are familial examples. But myself as a character, when I've been an evil character, I can see other members of the party and see their benefit. I might be an evil avenger or a warrior of some kind, and I put up with the cleric because I need him to heal me in battle or I'm going to die. Or I put up with the thief because I need him to watch for traps and unlock stuff so I can get to the treasure that I want. And so I find benefit in those that are within my party because they're a means to an end. They get me to my final goal of what I want to accomplish. And I can recognize as a character that I can't get there without their support.
Right. It is the notion of making use of those around you. It's kind of like the heist mentality. Let's bring together all of these people in order to accomplish a goal. And it is also the idea of like the honor amongst thieves. We are evil. We have a common goal. We're not going to betray each other because we're all part of that same group trying to accomplish that same thing. Everybody has a role. The thief tolerates the Avenger because the Avenger protects him. The Avenger tolerates the thief because the thief can disable traps. There is a necessary alignment that exists between various characters because they know it's important. You also get the same idea of like the Master Blaster syndrome. You have the weak but very intelligent character who makes sure to plan out things so that the bigger character can reap rewards. The bigger character knows that he's not that bright, but so long as he protects the intelligent character will ensure that he does not get caught for engaging in the type of behavior that he enjoys engaging in.
Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, we're spending a lot of time here talking about the importance of conversation with the characters, talking about their motivations, their backstories, finding a good way to kind of set up this party so that they can then, again, engage in the adventures and the quest that the DM setting forth. But there's also a level of this of the DM having to set some ground rules of gameplay so that things don't fall apart and that people can actually enjoy the game and move forward with it. So if you like, John, talk a little bit about some of the ground rules that you set so everyone just doesn't become murder hobos and just fly through the streets destroying everything and just setting off the beaten path or no path at all.
And I think we've already talked about this. So one is actions have consequences. You do a crime, you're probably going to be attacked or targeted in some way. The second thing is really closely tied to the conversation we're currently having, which is infighting. So how do you create an alliance? And then it's like, well, what happens if that alliance in some way breaks apart? And as a group, you guys have a conversation in session 0 for how party infighting is resolved. Is this a fight to the death? Do you allow character death as a result of infighting? Or do you resolve it in some other way? Sometimes that can be... that you only fight until one of you goes unconscious, and then it's like, well, you know, I've taught him my lesson, or I've taught her my lesson about what it is to betray me or to in some way offend me, and you allow the gameplay to progress without character death being a result of infighting. Or you simply don't allow it and say, listen, there's no possibility of infighting. It is assumed that you guys will always remain allies. That really comes down to party preference, to player preference, to GM preference for what you guys are comfortable with as a group. I would recommend that you guys do have a very good conversation about this at the start of the game, because you don't want to end up with the group as a whole getting upset and you know, there being a falling out or something like that, which can easily occur when you're dealing with this kind of volatile type of gameplay.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of. And it's interesting because the last several of our games have resulted in infighting when we played evil games.
Right.
We recently had Darusha blow our poor druid to smithereens after he was turned to stone.
Yeah.
The game before that, I ended up turning on the party with another one of the characters, and they, you know, attacked us in our keep that we had to defend against them. Before that, we had one where we had... I want to say it was a ranger. I can't recall exactly what the player was. It was in your Khazar Karath one, where we were turned against by one of our individuals as well, and our final battle was trying to defeat him. So those conversations were had, so we always knew it was a possibility, but several of them have turned out where it ends up with the campaign ending in character versus character conflict.
Right. There's actually quite a few games I've run that do that, and honestly, I feel like by and large, if you're running an evil party, that is, there's a very high likelihood that is what the conclusion is going to be. Ultimately, what ends up happening is there is a character that wants more than what the rest of the party can give them, and they will in some way betray them. You can see this a lot in, again, movies that deal with criminals in some way. You know, sometimes it's at the start of the movie where they start a heist and one of the characters betrays the other ones and gets away with the loot, and the rest of them have to go to prison or something like that. And then the rest of the movie is the betrayed character going in and trying to recover what they had been, or what had been lost because of that betrayal.
Yeah.
So that it is a possibility. It's a conversation that can be had. There are things that the GM can do to try and curb some of this. If you anticipate infighting, you anticipate betrayal, you can always interrupt that in some way with a well-timed encounter. Just have that up your sleeve. Be aware that at some point there will be a conflict, and just redirecting the player's attention to some kind of conflict is going to prevent them from necessarily turning on each other immediately. And then there's go ahead.
We're probably going to say the same thing. There's one piece that I want to make sure that we add in here before we kind of reach our close, and that is remembering that you're structuring a game for people to have fun. This is an enjoyable, thought experiment, role-playing, imaginary game where we're all coming together around a table to enjoy it. And we have to be sensitive to particular issues, especially in running an evil campaign, that some individuals may not want to imagine or engage in or explore as part of that. And I think that it's important to know what individuals, I don't want to use the word sensitivities, but what some triggering things may be that may be found within the course of gameplay, and whether or not those are going to be included or not. This is sometimes a fairly direct conversation too. Are you going to allow murder, slavery, rape? What is going to be allowed from player standpoint, character standpoint, what's going to be seen within the course of gameplay, and what are you going to allow to be on the table? And if there's a certain player that says, I really am not comfortable with seeing that or exploring that or whatever, I think we need to be respectful of that and make sure that we keep that out of the course of gameplay.
Right, and there's ways to handle that. I mean, you can either just say out and out, these things do not occur, whatever is on the no list. It can also be a scenario where it's like, yes, it can happen, but we don't want to talk about, we don't want a graphic torture scene to occur in the middle of what's supposed to be, like you said, a fun gameplay session. So it may be a situation where you leave that to a die roll and you fade to black and that's it. And then you go, you were either successful in your session or you failed in your session. And that's all there is to it. You don't engage in any further conversation about it. There are different ways of handling it. Talk to the group, figure out what people are comfortable with before you move past your session 0. Especially if you've got evil characters that are particularly on the just vile end of the spectrum and the things that they enjoy and the things that they engage in.
Mm-hmm. Do we have a positive note to end this on? I don't know if we want to end it on that.
Like I said, we've both done a lot of evil campaigns. I feel like the evil campaigns have been very memorable. I think that there's been a lot of enjoyment. I don't think of any of the games that I've run, especially the ones that end in inter-party conflict, that they've ended in a way that has created any hard feelings, because it's approaching the game as a game, and I think that that's the most important thing. Sometimes with D&D, it's very easy, if you're connected to a character, to get upset at the loss of that character, especially when it comes at the hands of other party members. But kind of removing yourself from that, recognizing that it's lighthearted fun and it's a game, and treating it with a little less seriousness in that regard, I think can end up with an enjoyable gameplay session and an enjoyable campaign overall.
Yeah, and I guess just my final thought too is, if you get, let's say midway into your game, you're into tier 2, tier 3 type of things, and you're seeing that tensions are starting to rise and people are kind of losing sight of the conversations you had in session 0, it might be good to call a timeout and bring everyone back to the table and re-explore what it is that you guys are doing, so that those tensions don't come to a breaking point where there are hard feelings that are being generated on the course of imaginary play.
Exactly. All right, so this is the session 0 video for Evil Parties. The next video, we're going to talk about tier 1 gameplay, what gameplay looks like, what quests look like, what adventures look like for Evil Parties, and that's what we're going to continue on with this short series, talking about Evil Parties and tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 gameplay, and just kind of give you some ideas on how you can start to structure a campaign that is centered around evil players, evil characters.
All right. See you guys next week.
Judge and Brew.